Hi there, everyone. In the interest of time, we're going to get started. So thank you all for joining us now. I'm just going to introduce Tobias Voegtlin and Bruce Swan. Tobias is the head of passenger service operations for the Lufthansa Group and CEO of Lufthansa InTouch. And Bruce Swan is the European Customer Care General Manager for Panasonic. And they're going to be exploring together how you can unify the vision of a happy and healthy contact center. So guys, I'm going to leave it over to you. Thank you very much.
Right. Great. Thanks very much, Sam. So hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Would much prefer to have done this in person, face to face, but I guess such is the situation we find ourselves in today. So we're going to talk a bit about what does it mean to unify a vision around a happy and healthy contact center. And I think we start with talking about our frontline colleagues. They tend to absorb the brunt or the impact of anything that impacts on our businesses. So most recent example being this pandemic, and our frontline teams have had to be the face of our businesses, trying to manage questions, queries, complaints coming through from our customer base. And it's also interesting that these colleagues tend to speak to more customers than anybody else in our entire business. And when we say speak, we mean have actual direct one-on-one conversations where they have their finger on the pulse of what's actually happening within our customer base. And I think when we talk about the unification of this vision, we're talking about how do we engage the rest of our business, the rest of our internal and external stakeholders to recognize the value that these frontline teams bring to the business, the fact that they are brand ambassadors, they're brand warriors who are out there on the front line trying to do the best they can to make sure that business continues uninterrupted. And I think part of what we'll talk through today and just explore is what does it mean to get the rest of our business involved? How do we make sure that engagement at the top of our business cascades through to the front line so that our colleagues feel supported and they feel valued? So the recent events of this global pandemic, certainly within Panasonic, provoked a need for pace. And a need for a lot of movement around how we make decisions quickly. How do we cut through some of the red tape to make sure that our customers not only get the support that they need, but also that the well-being and the mental stability of our agents is protected and acknowledged. And that we nurture new talent into our business, but we also support those tenured colleagues who have a great deal of experience. So when all of these murmurings started coming through about this novel virus, we had to start putting some plans in place quite quickly. And one of the things we recognized was in order to be able to make these seamless and frictionless decisions, we needed to make sure that all of the blockers that are generally in place in terms of compliance and sign-off are effectively smoothed or removed. So what would normally take a number of months to secure hardware and software and licenses and update contracts, we had to compress that into a number of days. And part of that was telling the story about how customer care and how our frontline teams deliver value into the business. How when customers are having problems about engineers not being able to go into their homes because of lockdown, they're going to phone through to these colleagues. So they need the tools, the training and the support in order to be able to field these types of queries from customers who may be quite emotional. So by unifying the business behind a single goal, and that single goal being continuing to deliver a high level of experience, we managed to remove friction and waste and delay from a very large-scale transition to an at-home working policy. We managed to communicate these messages out to our customers through our website, and we managed to drive attrition down within our customer care group to nearly zero for the past 3 months. So I think what would be helpful to explore is how other businesses have done that. And I think I'm going to pass across to Tobias now to talk us through how Lufthansa also support this view around a unified vision for customer care.
Yeah,
so
thanks,
over to you,
Bruce.
Tobias.
Thanks, Bruce. And also warm welcome from my side. And Bruce has said it, we would have done that much more. We would have liked to do that much more in person, obviously, but I'm actually amazed how well this works in a digital format, and how well the whole event is organized. And looking back, we are now the closing session, looking back and reflecting on a number of discussions over the last couple of days in various presentations and roundtables. I find it also amazing, pretty much every business which is represented in this conference has faced the same challenges over the last 2 to 3 months. And I think the response or the actions which have been taken have been very, very similar across the organizations, as far as I could follow the discussions. And Bruce, you've said it, the way the whole business has been run has changed dramatically. I remember in early March, we had a board meeting when before the public knew it, we got the message from the medical service of the Lufthansa Group that we pretty much have to introduce social distancing pretty much immediately. And I think it was like midday in our board meeting, and we immediately stopped the board meeting and started to put people into back office, into home office. So our back office colleagues were gone within a couple of hours into home office. And from that moment on, the whole way how we've run our organization, how we've run our business has completely changed. We went from a board structure where every board member is responsible for their function, and we bring it together in the board of directors, in the executive board, to pretty much a project-based mode where on a daily basis we have extended the core board with essential functions, and on a daily basis we have taken decisions in a speed and consequence which we certainly haven't done before. And talking about a happy and healthy contact center and how do we get there, I think this challenge has also completely changed over the last 2 to 3 months. How can we ensure that we have a happy and healthy? And healthy is obviously a totally different meaning these days than probably 3 or 4 months ago. And I think this is also the whole challenge with all the people moving into home office. How do we manage the people? How do we make sure they still feel looked after? How do we make sure they feel connected with each other, but also with their leadership, with us as a leadership? It's a completely new set of challenges, and that's certainly something I think which will not be a quick fix. And in a lot of discussions over the last couple of days, a lot of colleagues have said the world will change, and certainly the world will change. And I think quite a few more people will stay in the home office, or the ratio between home and office-based colleagues will change. But that, as a consequence, also means the whole management and leadership style also need to change. And I'm not sure everybody who plans to keep people in the home office has understood the full extent of what is required to make that a success.
I think your comment about the leadership style needing to change is absolutely on point, Tobias. I do sometimes get this sense across various organizations that when we talk about a contact center agent as an individual, there isn't always this true understanding that this is a human being. It's not just a voice on the other end of a phone that's a digital automatron. This is someone who has maybe children, maybe a mortgage, maybe their own set of challenges, but they're choosing to sit here and to support the business and to support the brand. I think somewhere along that thought process, some of that humanity is sometimes lost. So when we talk about our teams being on the front line of absorbing challenges and providing this high levels of support, they also tend to be on the front line of cost-cutting measures. And a lot of the time it can be a case of they are just numbers on a piece of paper, and when cost cutting comes around, they just start striking X's through certain numbers. So I think what we're trying to do, certainly within our organization, is to humanize the face of our customer care teams. So we're trying to invite executives, invite C-level members of our teams into the contact centers to meet these individuals who work so hard to provide support to the brand. And through that exercise, look to change the style of leadership and, I guess, shift the lens through which they're perceived. How do you find that within your business, how customer care and customer service is generally perceived?
Well, I totally agree with what you say. I think it's certainly a challenge. But within the Lufthansa group, Lufthansa historically has been a very engineering-driven company. Yeah, we had the best planes. Well, some people might argue, but certainly over the last few years, I think a lot of progress has been made. We have the best seat. It was always a competition from an engineering point of view, and within the Lufthansa group, very certainly there's been quite a bit of change in thinking. What differentiates us from other airlines, and that's certainly our people, because the business class seat might be state of the art, but that's probably only if it is state of the art for 1 or 2 years, and then the competition brings in a new seat and a new cabin interior. For us at Lufthansa, over the last 3 years, customer centricity has become a very, very big topic. A very big issue, seen as the differentiator. And I think for us, as the responsible management and leadership team for customer service, our challenge is how can we get the value out of the human interaction? How can we increase the value of the human interaction? I mean, if you think about it, if someone travels with us, people get their boarding pass online, they get at the airport, they go through security, they go maybe to the shops, and then they go to the plane and the board. And once they have arrived, they leave the plane and leave the airport pretty much the same way without being in contact with Lufthansa. So the only options we've got to be, or where we are in real contact with our customers and passengers, is a service center, if they contact us, or on board. And I think on board, there's been a lot of focus, how can we improve that experience? And now the focus shifts also, and people understand, well, actually, if we get the experience in the service center right, and we have the right agents, happy agents delivering a good customer service, then there's a lot of value to be delivered.
Yeah, that piece around when you talk about that interaction is an interesting one to weigh up. So many businesses, again, to try and either improve the customer experience or to try and drive down cost, or indeed both, are focusing on almost deflecting customers to digital channels, self-help channels, using AI, bots and automation. And I guess by doing that, you do tend to redirect some of these contacts away from people. There is this risk that we do that to such an extent that actually we lose that interaction. We lose that finger on the pulse about what are our customers talking to us about? How do we actively add value into this conversation by understanding customers' purchase intent or buying triggers or emotional needs? And I think that's something that we're looking at, certainly within our own business, is how do we find that balance where we don't want to push all of our interactions online, but by the same token, the interactions that we do have, we want to make sure that they do provide a level of value. And I guess that's where we certainly have found some traction within our business around getting support and unifying people in terms of our stakeholder group behind our strategic direction. It's by going beyond the fact that we have a transactional problem-solving call with the customer to a call that actually talks about how do we sell something? How do we add value to a customer's life and lifestyle? Mm-hmm. And by making sure that we bring our stakeholders on that journey, but also bring our frontline teams on that journey, helps us to make sure that we're all sort of heading in a very similar direction. Because part of what we found historically is that at a corporate level, the business will have a strategic vision. And then as we sort of break down the functions within our operation, each department seems to have its own strategic vision, which sometimes cuts across their peers or the corporate ones. So we've had to work quite hard to make sure that there's a high degree of alignment and that we live that alignment, and it's not just not just words and rhetoric. So I think it'd be interesting to sort of understand how are Lufthansa balancing that, because you're right. You can do so much stuff with regards to travel and airlines online now.
Well, and I don't see a contradiction to what you were saying earlier, drive down cost, improve customer experience at the same time, because I think a lot of our customers expect self-service and automation to a certain extent. I always say people flying with us, they don't compare their experience with Lufthansa with their experience with Air France, for example. People who fly with us, they compare their experience with their latest experience with Amazon, for example. Yeah, how digital that has been, that they didn't need to make a call, that they could help and solve themselves. And I think that is the benchmark which we need to live up to. And I think our aim is very clearly to automate the services and push self-services where there is no added value in terms of human interaction. And the classical example is we still have people calling us asking if the flight is on schedule, on time, and what gate the flight leaves. And this is all transactions where we don't see any value, and I don't think the customer has a value by speaking to us. But I think especially these days, with the flight schedule starting off again and slowly increasing flights, there's a lot of uncertainty with customers. They don't know if I fly to France, will I be able to enter the country, or will I have to return? What are the conditions on board? Is it safe to travel in an airplane? And it is really safe. I think it has been said many times. We had a case where on a flight we had COVID cases, obviously, on our flights, and followed up. And there's not one single case where someone sitting next to a COVID-19 positive person who has been infected. Yeah. But these are all questions people ask themselves, and so we see a real value now consulting the people, giving them advice, helping them.
I think what might be interesting for all of us to explore is when we as customer care professionals look at these interactions, we recognize that value. We recognize the emotion, but that's because we live this day in, day out. It'd be interesting to reflect on to what extent members of our stakeholder group appreciate those types of interaction. How close are our CEOs, our managing directors, our sales and marketing directors, how close are they to our customers? Have they spoken to customers recently? And I mean, have a one-to-one conversation and understand some of the need and the emotion and the requirements that customers have of our business. So I'm not sure if that's something that Lufthansa do. I know Panasonic certainly don't do that as much as they should do in terms of narrowing the gap between the end user and the stakeholder group.
Well, can there be done more? I'm sure there can be done more, but especially in the last few months, I mean, a lot of people, they didn't get through in the service center, for example, because at times we had a really high volume. So our group executive board, they get messages via LinkedIn or they get direct email. So there's a lot of interaction. And we do that also every week, a certain number of passengers who had a bad experience, who have complained, that we call them personally and speak with the customers. Understand what they think, what the problem is, what we should do better, and this is really much appreciated. And this is done also in our group executive board. We have, since the beginning of this year, we have a group executive function position. It's called customer. This is also something which Lufthansa never had before. We have Christina Förster, who is running the customer function on group level. So the customer voice, the customer aspect, the customer value becomes much more important and much more priority. How is that at Panasonic?
I think it depends on our region. So our business is just split up by countries and regions, and some of the teams gravitate towards understanding customer care a lot better than others. I think where possible, we are actively inviting members of our executive team into our contact centers to meet the teams, to listen to some of the calls, to actually look at some of the tools. So when we talk about, I don't know, having to run through a cost down exercise, actually showing some of the impacts that will occur if we do that face to face with an exec, I think tends to strike home. That sometimes it's not just a case of we just cross out a few zeros on a spreadsheet. Actually, those zeros mean this number of people, this level of stress within the contact center. And again, by humanizing these individuals, it means that at least our finance teams and our exec teams take a bit more of a reflective stance before making these changes that potentially impact our brand, and also impact people's lives. So what we've done very, very articulately over the last couple of years is we've actively gone out and told the story about customer service. We've told the story about the journey we've taken to move from a very transactional, efficiency focused operation that used to focus on service levels and handle times, to one that is now focused on experiential key performance indicators. So we will measure advocacy, success, effort, and emotion. We will measure agent advocacy, satisfaction. We have a really robust agent well-being program in place now. And all of these factors, they contribute to the whole vision of what we're trying to achieve. It's all about how do we drive a great customer experience. And if we're really truthful about it, a great customer experience has to, at some stage, translate into revenue, into the business. That's ultimately what we have to be geared towards. So when we talk in those terms to members of our stakeholder group, I think it makes it a bit clearer in terms of what they do has an impact on how much we can engage customers and to what extent we can retain their loyalty. I guess if this recent pandemic has proved anything, it's proved that if we need to move quickly, we can.
Yes.
But again, we just need to try and decrease that distance between our execs and our customers. So we're going to put a poll up shortly. I think that'll try and gauge to what extent some of your non-customer care execs have actually taken calls or had a conversation with an actual end customer. And that can be at any time. But be interested to try and get a sense of, throughout different industries, what's the general feel on this. So we'll give a few seconds to run that through. And then,
so while the people vote, Bruce, you've mentioned your agent well-being program. Do you want to share some details about that program with us?
Yeah, of course. So we acknowledged, it must have been a couple of years ago now, that coming into a contact center, when you sit down and you profile what a day-to-day looks like for an agent, most of the time they're coming in, logging into multiple systems. Their view of the world is this box that we're all looking at right now. That's their view. They come in, they got limited break times, they have targets of contact volumes they need to get through, their work is scrutinized, and they get very little time to decompress, particularly if the work that they're doing is either routinely mundane or highly emotionally charged, because not all customers that phone in are happy. So they have this constant emotional roller coaster that they are on throughout the course of what can be an 8-hour shift, with very little time to talk to their colleagues about it, settle their minds down and refocus. And then they are brought off into training courses, and then they're coached because some of their calls might not be world class all of the time. It's a lot to process for an individual day in, day out. And when we started having some roundtable discussions with our frontline colleagues, I think we started to really feel some of this emotion coming through. So what we took the decision to do was to actually focus on how do we change the way that our teams view working in a customer care center. How do they not see it through a negative lens? So we've introduced a high number of well-being activities. So we've got a software social platform that all of our agents have access to. And we publish regular articles about well-being, about different types of exercises, lots of different information about stress management, time management. So there's a digital element that they can go in and look at any time. We also encourage downtime off the phones and emails and chat, where agents can go and talk to each other and just decompress. We'll have little well-being events. So we'll have a greens juice and a seed and a nut day, and we'll have a chocolate day and a cake day and all these other things that, again, they get people away from their desks, get them interacting, give them some time to clear their minds, and also introduce an element of fun. Because I think it's quite easy in business to forget about having fun. So trying to provoke that type of environment, we found it to be incredibly rewarding. So I think when we've looked at we use Net Promoter Score for our agents. So if we go back 2 years, our Net Promoter Score was -33, which is terrible. And when we reran it, we run it quarterly, and we got the results from December that I seem to remember, we're +33. So we've shifted that agent sentiment quite dramatically. And again, now that the teams are in lockdown, their team leaders and account managers are phoning them regularly to check in. How are they feeling? Is there any support that they need? We're not trying to focus too much on the why you're not available, why you're underperforming, because there has to be this balance, right?
Yeah.
How are Lufthansa managing that sort of transition?
The transition in terms of the home office, you mean?
Yeah, into home office, and balancing that need for high productivity versus trusting colleagues to do the right thing.
Well, I think we have moved people so quickly in a home office that I openly say we didn't have the right structure in place. Yeah, so we've moved them first, and now we're trying to bring the structure into place to support them. And I think a lot of the aspects which you have mentioned is also on our agenda, obviously. But I think with the balance between home office and office-based colleagues changing dramatically, and I think we all agree that this will be an effect which will be lasting to a certain extent. I don't think that everybody who has moved into home office will return to the office at some stage, and nobody knows when that will be anyway. So I think the whole infrastructure, the whole management, the whole, how do we teach our people? How do we educate our people? How do we support our people? How do we lead our people? All this needs to change dramatically, because it's a completely different business if our colleagues are in the home office as opposed to the office on the floor up, and then you go into the next meeting room to have a one-to-one if you need one. Yeah, so I think it's not just technology. I think technology is probably the easiest part. I think the much more difficult part is certainly how to build the whole business and infrastructure around that. In terms of an infrastructure, I don't mean the hardware. I mean the soft skill and the soft side of leading the colleagues.
And I think I'd agree with that. I think it makes it a lot more challenging when you can't just walk into the middle of a contact center and absorb the atmosphere. You've almost got to phone into 500, 600 individual contact centers to try and get a sense of what's going on. I think we've got the results of our poll. So when we have a look, I think that's encouraging that a lot of people, a lot of businesses are encouraging non-customer care execs to actually field contacts from end customers to get a sense of what they're asking, and I guess to include them as part of this unified vision. I think when we take a step back and look at what's really important to the business, particularly during these, I guess, uncertain times, I think what is quite evident is that human touch, the piece around actually picking up a phone and checking in with somebody, and with customer care it's a lot more pronounced, because we've taken effectively teams of social animals, teams of people who feed off a lot of energy, and we've moved them out of that team environment into a isolated silo, and expecting them to just continue to smile and deliver and absorb this potentially highly emotionally charged activity. So that's where there's this thought around how do we demonstrate value? How do we make sure that our execs continue to to lend their influence beyond just signing off an invoice. So I think the other question for me, Tobias, is what's Lufthansa's thoughts around continuing to keep, I guess, the wider business engaged with customer care activity beyond just this very isolated crisis situation? What's the longer term view?
Well, I think I've got one example which I forgot to mention earlier. I think the question kind of relates to your question now. How do we engage senior executives from other functions and also from the board? And I think at Lufthansa Group we've got a very good program. It's called Management and Practice. And from the first 3 hierarchy levels across the Lufthansa Group, every colleague needs to spend 1 day in practice. And it's 2 options you can spend your day in practice. First is you're on the plane serving drinks to our customers sitting on the plane and bringing out the food trays. And the other option is you come into the service center and you spend 1 day in the service center and obviously meeting also a management team. But the focus, about 80% of the time of that day, is spent on the floor, sitting next to our agents and listening to calls. And I think we had people from legal, we had people from finance, we had people from HR. And quite a few of them had an experience which they never expected and which they had never before, because they understood, oh no, I understand the cost pressures you've got, because if they listen to a call which takes 20 minutes because we've got customers calling us with 3 different issues, then there's much better understanding. And I think this is a really important point, and that's something probably other businesses can learn from, to introduce such a program, which I think is very highly effective. To answer the second part of your question, what does the future hold for Lufthansa? I mean, the state support in general has been agreed. Shareholders need to agree to it. But nevertheless, I think the group is still in a life-threatening situation. 9 billion, every penny needs to be repaid. With very high interest, interest rates which I never get for my investments. So I think the situation, the cost pressure will increase, and I think it will become more difficult because at the moment it always depends on your priorities, and at the moment the priority very clearly is get the cost down as quickly and as aggressively as possible in order to be able to get through the situation, and then hopefully 2023, 2022, end of 2022, early 2023. Hopefully, we will slowly come to a position which is comparable to early 2020. Will that happen? We don't know.
Yeah, we're having a conversation internally earlier on this week with our management team around, is this pandemic an isolated ripple? And are we going to return to business as usual? Barring some of the economic impact, are we going to return to a business as usual situation in a couple of months where we can take out some of the learnings from this pandemic and simply feed it back in? Or are we destined to maintain this type of lifestyle that we have become accustomed to for years to come? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it all depends on the medicine. Yeah, if there's if some pharmacy companies come up with good solutions, I think that's a very important aspect to answer that question. But in general, in terms of how we live our lives and how we run our businesses, I think we will have a new normal situation, and I think it wouldn't be clever to just go back to the old normal, even if the situation would allow. Carsten Spohr, our chief executive of the group, has very early said, never waste a good crisis. Yeah, and I think it's a huge opportunity, if you want to look at it from a positive aspect, to do quite a few things which you wanted to do for a long time, but where you never really had the urgent pressure potentially to really do them. And I think now is the time to do that.
So I guess with everything that's happened, and I think the term new normal has been thrown around a huge amount in the press and in different meetings over the past few months. So whatever new normal means to different people, what is the role that customer care is going to play in businesses going forward? Do you see that as being something new, or do you see that as continuing to be business as usual?
I think it will become even more important, because I think spending power in general will reduce. I think people will be more selective. And I think the question is, how can you differentiate yourself from the competition? And I think that's a very general statement. But in the airline industry, it's more specific, because there's a lot of uncertainty. People are traveling, they're afraid, as I've said before. And I think if you have there good customer care and you're reliable and you can consult your customers, I think you can also help to bring passenger numbers up quicker again. So I think it's a real value. Customer care in the airline industry at the moment is a huge asset if you do it correctly. If you don't do it proper, and if you're not reliable, if you're not accessible, if you're not available, then it can have the exact opposite effect. And I guess it's similar at your end, I would assume.
Yeah, so we have this. So we had a 3-year strategy, and we thought, right, we know what we need to do in 3 years. And what we've had to certainly do recently is take some time to step back from that strategy and really challenge ourselves to reflect on whether or not that strategy is still relevant. The majority of it still is. The direction that we were heading in and continue to head in is, how do we provide a much more robust digital platform? How do we provide our colleagues on the front line with more flexibility to choose whether or not they work from home or they work from the office? I think that latter one has just been brought forward a little bit. We kind of had to shift everyone from home. So we now know it's possible. All we need to now figure out is, what are the logistics and how do we operationalize it so that we can scale it up or down as we need to? How do we make it easy and frictionless for our frontline colleagues to make a decision on a Monday that they work from the office, and they wake up on a Tuesday morning and think, actually, I just want to work from home today. It's a very new business proposition, certainly within our business. And I think it requires some thought. But when we think about the concept of this healthy contact center, I don't think we can kid ourselves to think that contact center means a room with a lot of people in it anymore.
No, absolutely.
I think it means a function made up of a number of people who are whose well-being is acknowledged, who enjoy what they do, and who are ultimately brand advocates, driving value back into the business. So I think what's going to be fundamental for us is, how do we get a good balance between the digital proposition and the hybrid work at home bricks and mortar proposition, but also how do we continue to bring our stakeholders along for the ride effectively, and keep them tuned in, because if we do have a full work from home model, they don't have the luxury anymore of visiting a contact center necessarily. We have to think of new ways of engaging our stakeholder groups in that, and again, keeping them close to our end customers. I think the question to you from me is around your vision for what your contact center looks like going forward. Has that had to change recently, or has it largely remained on the same trajectory?
I think it's the logic and structure is pretty much the same. We had a home office before, not to the extent we have it these days. We had the home office components before, not for cost reasons, simply for widening our recruitment pool and opportunities. And I think looking into the future, it certainly needs to be a combination, because I think there's also colleagues who will not be able to work from home, because in Turkey, for example, they live with their whole family in a very small apartment and haven't got a room where they can sit and work on their own. So I think it's a combination of both. There will certainly be people who want to work from home. There will certainly be people who want to continue to work from the office, also because they like the interaction with their colleagues sitting next to them. And I think a combination is the key, and you need to find the right balance, I assume.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That whole piece around balance is important. We've had a question come through to the panel about structure, and how if we allow too much freedom of choice, it risks destabilizing some of that structure. In terms of things need to be modeled, there need to be plans in place, and I guess that's an interesting concept to explore. So we have this concept that in a contact center, everything has to be planned for and structured and rigid. And I'm not sure to what extent businesses have explored the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of trusting our teams to do the right things, trusting that they need to be online between 9 and 5. These are their break times. How you service customers is on you. You need to do it in the way that we've trained you to do it. Now demonstrate it, and we will measure you on your outcomes, and then go from there. So it's a different sort of approach. So I think what we're going to do is in a moment, we're going to bring Ronan up on camera, and Ronan's going to sort of facilitate some Q&A.
Oh, unmute. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you for the responses so far. We had another question, and it is probably closing because we're running out of time. But there's a professor, behavioral economist professor in the US, Dan Ariely. He has the Center for Advanced Hindsights, which is a really cool name. I wish I had thought of that. Advanced Hindsights. Now, if we have the benefit of hindsight, and I had to roll back and put you in, let's say, late February, what would you have done differently throughout this crisis? Because we've all responded, moved everybody home where we could, but what have you would have done differently in the contact center context? I think that would be interesting. Tobias, you want to start?
Yeah, I find that quite an interesting question, because I had exactly that discussion with the workers' union here in Berlin. I mean, the relationship with the workers' union has not always been problem-free. Yeah, but during this crisis, we went in there very early and explained them the situation, explained them the outlook, and they have supported us throughout the crisis with every action and every measure which we have suggested. We've explained it very well. We've been very transparent. We've been very honest. Exactly that discussion. What would we do? What would we have done differently? And I honestly said that I don't know what I would have done differently. I think based on the knowledge we had at each point, we would. I wouldn't do anything differently. Our focus was first on the health of the employees, getting them into home office, introducing and implementing social distancing, then on our operations, and then we took very drastic and quick measures to protect our financials, and that has worked for us.
What would you have planned differently? Let me slightly change. I accept the analysis, but knowing now that it was coming, what would you have done before?
Then I would have.
I don't know. A laptop for every employee.
Yes.
Seems in hindsight a good idea, because then sending them home would have been a non-issue, and I'm sure you, like everybody.
Okay. But that's a different question. Well, certainly we would have had the hardware, so that on a fingertip everybody could move into the home office. The people would just, when they leave our office, they just need to collect the hardware and can go home. So that's certainly an aspect. We probably wouldn't have done the odd recruiting in January and February, which we did, because we didn't know what was coming. Yes. And we would have staffed up. Well, I wouldn't have staffed up because it was temporary. I think we would have planned in hindsight to be able to peak our resources in the months of March. I think these three aspects, I think if we would have known by the end of December what was coming, I think that would have been the aspect.
Bruce, same question. 2. 1, from what you did, what you would have done differently, and if you knew before, what would you have prepared differently?
I think I can probably answer both in the same way. So we were quite lucky in that when we started hearing news coming out of Asia about this novel virus in February, we were actually on site in one of our biggest contact centers. So we got people into a room and we started playing out a number of various scenarios in terms of scale, impact, cost, by country, to try and get a sense of what would we need to have in place in order to make this all work. So we constructed a blueprint and a doomsday blueprint, just in case, to make sure that we weren't caught out by any surprises. I think as the weeks then went on, we could start to see which of these scenarios was being brought to life in which country. Now, things that I guess we couldn't predict were the extent to some of the lockdown measures, the limitations on travel and movement. So needing to have remote tech support, needing to have someone's in-home IT infrastructure assessed remotely were challenges that we probably should have focused on a bit more in a bit more detail. But there's nothing catastrophic that I think caused us to think, wow, we wish we'd done that a lot differently. I think what we will continue to focus on is checking in with our colleagues, because being locked down for a number of months is going to take its toll on anybody. Not being around other people, not being able to feed off other people's energy and create a buzz around customer care. So what we hadn't planned for is the length that some of this impact would have continued for. So I think we would probably have spent more, well, if we had to do it again, would spend more time planning for a longer term pandemic, rather than thinking this will all be over and done within a month or two.
Thank you very much. I think we're out of time, and I want to thank both of you on behalf of the audience. I think it was a fascinating discussion and a very good closing to what was otherwise a very, I think, intense and insightful day. So I think, you know, the traditional, I'll clap on behalf of the audience. It's not the same. Next time, Sam, we'll have a recording. There's applause from 10,000 people to get to reward the speakers and people up front. But thank you both for attending.
Thank you very much, guys, and thank you very much, Tobias. It was really, really good conversation.
Thank you as well. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.